Jill here with Sirius Talis Moon, and continuing on the series, um, I want to talk about becoming unextortable and aligning into economicity of life energy. This is inspired by taking a look at pinpoints to the esotericism and philosophy from east to west and integrating specific um, specific key points that are key to not just sense of self, but also joy of life and creation while sustaining legacy. And when we're talking about sustaining legacy, we cannot allow ourselves to misalign with power that is not um, centered in a relaxed sense of self. What am I talking about, relaxed sense of self? I'm not talking about the rigid self. I'm not even talking about the I am, let's say, a woman, I am an astrologer, or whichever comes around the I am. I'm talking about the notion that on an energy level, a life energy level, self-sustaining and economicity, if we think about legacy as a marathon, and in marathon, we do not conserve our energy by consuming a lot of, let's say, fetuses. Okay, I've been talking about energy level. The secret to our longevity is actually in the staying centered or becoming centered, because most emperors and leaders are not born centered so that they will be extortable. Not getting into the mythified philosopher king or philosopher ruler, not denouncing or resigning life, which is kind of like talking about transcending the sexuality, and sometimes by gurus that end up on Epstein list. Okay, namely ending up being expendable to the greater systems. Um, One doesn't know outside of the realm of knowing. And while it might sound cryptic, Neptune in Aries is also about that knowledge. Um, and we cannot say in the biblical sense, because the Bible doesn't actually offer us a sense of knowing. And this is where becoming unextortable is becoming aligned with the gnosis, in whichever way it appears, that the I am and sense of self and life energy needs not to siphon or be siphoned. It looks different to the practices that most current leaders and emperors or prospective emperors and monarchs or leaders hidden and visible were growing into or raised upon. If you were raised to run an extortion cult, you were raised to become expendable in the eternity myth of your lineage conglomerate. And be outthrown by violence rather than um, aligning with life and the eternity within the moment itself in an authentic um, in an authentic way, meaning in your origin energy. That is becoming unextortable, and that is relevant for each and every individual, um, particularly when we think about the sun being exalted in Aries and aligning with our inner sun or our inner heart. And this is the alignment of the lower chakras and the higher chakras. It's not the disembodiment from the lower chakras and the myth of aligning the heart and the mind. It's not the disembodiment of the higher chakras and the myth of the secular being unspiritual. It is not holding attachment to any particular rank or order, and in that, allowing the authentic energy to arise, knowing that it contains that legacy in itself. It needs not to siphon or to take it from another chart or another person. Um, and that's probably one of the biggest myths that guide people to try at destiny swaps that that are inauthentic to the life energy and create but friction and challenges rather than actual success. Or it creates a person succeeding by their own merit, but because they siphoned energy, they believe that they are succeeding by embodying qualities of another that they never to begin with needed to siphon energy from. Or that they believe that had somebody been alive, their legacy would not be promised, which is an illusion. All the scams of extortion, from honeypots to um, child honeypots, which is basically trafficked children and trafficked adults, to harems. One particularly risky one is the harem, because this is where there is a belief that a person is being amplified, but they're actually being reduced. Um, they're being reduced to misplaced arousal and trauma bond, which interferes with a sense of self happiness. Um, and when I talk about happiness, I don't mean as one fraction of an emotional spectrum. Um, and it's also an awareness that each and every person is sovereign in their capacity to align with that. And this is where our leadership qualities actually grow. It is self honoring in its purest form, and because the sun exalts in the sign of the self, This is one of the best leadership practices that each individual can do, regardless of what that shine looks like, or how it's being, or if it's being perceived by the outside world or by the world outside of them in a particular predictive way. Neptune, by the way, has a lot to do with the way we're being perceived, being mysterious, and mysterious even to us. Naturally, like we don't have to work for it, and there's no use to fight that, to fight that, when that happens, and we might not be aware of that when that happens. So, heart alignment in itself is amazing, and it is authentic when it is the natural result of alignment of the lower and higher chakras, or working through the lower chakras with the heart aligned. And the heart will continue to evolve as we process through understanding that the lower is the upper and the upper is the lower. And this is done not by siphoning or participating in, let's say, Epstein related esoteric practices, but actually negating them, and not by being the focus on negating them, but aligning with the sense of self. Even so much as the frequency of this episode is that alignment. Um, the sun is a lot about happiness, and happiness not as a manic state, but actually as an authentic sense of self state. The rights of ridicule, while promising to make us immune to criticism, or to buddy up with, without paying attention that what we're buddying up with is already superseding what would be considered legacy for us, and not by having super legacy, but by crossing the threshold and being remembered for our fall rather than our shine. Now, there's a lot of non-attachment and surrender of the fact that we can be remembered by our fall rather than our shine. Um, but when it comes to what we can do about that, that alignment with the sense of self is that point of interference. And authentically addressing with ourselves when something is misaligned, when something is missing, not being satisfied with what seems to run the world. Even the spiritual teachers and the people around us, the more we grow and shine and radiate in our own confidence, um, we learn to sort the wheat from the chaff regarding um, of what they have to say. And each person can meet that to in whichever place they meet this notion. But it talked about healing in spite of the healing systems, and the potency of the sovereign self to emerge in spite of the ruling systems being, and this episode being an opportunity for anybody for the solar qualities of each individual, regardless of their rank, bloodline, or origin or caste, to basically self honor and grow their legacies beyond what the world seems to allow, or how the rules of power seem to present themselves. Sometimes that means radical acceptance of what isn't. If somebody is on Epstein list now, and it's kind of like out there, so that radical acceptance of this is what it is. This is what it is. This is the friction that exists. This is the smugness of the environment, the perpetual smugness of the environment, the perpetual chronic inner dissatisfaction that was only alleviated by substance or states of ecstatic joy at being a perpetrator. And um, and that radical acceptance, with the fact that the patent of the extortion code plays on doing the illegal, believing one can get away with that, and never really making that legal so that they can preserve an artificial sense of class, caste, master, slave, or anything that misaligns with not just heart health but happiness. And the fact that each individual on the face of the earth, regardless of their sex, gender, origin, bloodline, caste, or class, is scheduled to have that innate knowing and the courage to express it to themselves. Um, it's not just about people speaking truth to power, it's first and foremost people being open and vulnerable and authentic to themselves and aware, because even that awareness was previously not fully there before. Um, I'm seeing complaints of men on Gen Z men being more patriarchal than their boomer ancestors, um, and basically um, showing to us how those internal narcissists that to make a caricature out of ourselves trying to be fit to the extortion called logic of what's being a man, of what's being a woman, of what's being powerful, of what being feminist even, because Ghislaine Maxwell is not Ghislaine Epstein. And that was the feminism that we were supposed to aspire to. Think about Oprah Winfrey, the empathetic, emotionally intelligent, vulnerable and relatable Oprah Winfrey having to mingle with those type of environments. And I did not read the correspondence thoroughly. This is why I'm being tender with my declaration. But just think, what is a working environment that basically is surrounded with, in German we call it Schadenfreude, does to the emotional, relatable, empathetic self or parts of the self that are there. And by the way, it's a part of the extortion called logic for them to be there. They're not fake. The whole point is that they have to be real. Um, and this is also why when the until this is also why I said something that sounds like a Zen sentence or a Kant sentence, but it's basically it's something that sounds like this big German philosophy, but it's actually very simple. We cannot know, we cannot have a sense of knowing without having the sense of self, and that only works with the exalted heart in Aries with the alignment of the lower and upper chakras, because our knowing is misconstrued. And by the way, the obsession of people to say that they have known, and usually they refer it both in the biblical sense but also as informants, someone through their horrifying with the WH rituals, is basically them declaring their ignorance regarding that which they seek to say that they know or have known. Um, and this is also regarding the more, people use it to call it pathologies, or um, where people would aim to sexual encounters in order to supposedly know the opponent from an attempt to self-regulate, um, thinking that knowing the sexuality means knowing who we're dealing with. And while it definitely exposes the pathologies of the person in front of us, it is not knowing. And by the way, it is recovery um, to even state that to oneself. It is not knowing if it's not love that is actually loving. Intelligence wise, security wise, attended to political assassination prevention, and discovered that the very things that would prevent that would be to nullify the extortion called patent of manufacturing an offender causing perpetual smugness, and then even the belief of people that it would be legal to rape children, where in terms of the politics of power, it would never be legal to, bless you, mom, it would never be legal to rape children because the whole point of manufacturing child molesters was to extort them. It basically, if we take out the extortion, it is no longer profitable to manufacture a child molester. And extortion would also mean their medical bill. We see that when countries deal with certain particular survivalistic crises where they have to have energy. And so suddenly, for example, in the Ukraine war, they showed in Israel before, prior to the 7th October war, how to make a Molotov bottle. Basically, how to generate energy weapon, because they wanted the civilians to fight, let's say, a possible invasion or a possible external regime, and maybe die trying, but they definitely were applying to the sovereign citizen and wishing that the citizen would be self-sustaining in their energy, in their food. But of course, they tried to have a bar on the actual potential success of doing so, and yet they could not have that bar set too low because they really did wanted to alleviate their burden at dealing with the regime. Maybe later bombing the civilians, um, but we do see it where countries are actually in survival situation, they begin to. In fact, one of the greatest food preservation methods we have by North Korean families that learn to preserve food for literally eternity. And because some of the preservation methods are contributing to probiotics, then some of that food is like extremely healthy. Yet I do not prescribe in North Korea as as a diet regimen. Okay, eating your fresh mellows is better. Um, Making fresh tea from fresh nettle is better. Eating the natural growing red fruits up north is better, okay, than preserving an egg for a century. Um, so, which shows us that the Arizona behind in North Korea was a Svalbard-like nation. What do I mean? In Svalbard, they keep the food reservoirs of the seeds of the crops that they later sell as fertilizers and ban them from growing naturally. Um, yeah, be a totalitarian towards totalitarianism and a sovereign towards sovereigns or towards people that wish to sovereign up in the face of totalitarianism. Um, so, of course, this stirs up, if if talking about sexuality stirs up the lower astral demons in people or the unhealed self in people, talking about the heart triggers the body, heart, mind, and soul, and all the chakras of people. So it's a fundamental trigger. um, and particularly because we rely on the false self, we rely on the false knowledge, the false light, the false power, and outside it does look like a mirage. The mirage looks very real when we think about companies like Standard Oil, when we think about the big media tech conglomerates that and those seemingly unattainable successions of power. um, But what we are unprepared for is the megalithic power structure fall and the not necessary perpetuation of the cycle, particularly when we take into account that we are transitioning, albeit through Kali Yuga, which is okay. I'm not here to gaslight anybody. Okay, what they call dark ages, and dark ages are basically no longer being able to ignore or being um, completely desensitized to, or if there is desensitization, it is to allow us to deal and to tend to the issue at hand. And by the way, this is a good Neptune teaching. The desensitization is to allow us to deal with the topic at hand effectively. It's not to escape the topic. It is also pertaining to um, amphetamines. This is why one person that would take, let's say, whether it's a psychedelic drug or amphetamine, in order to deal, process, recover, and move to more natural forms of healing, more organic forms of healing, um, is likely to have more success than a person that is taking the very drug to maintain an image of a functioning person, toward, usually first and foremost towards themselves. Um, this is also in Aries. The sun goes through purification. We're about to enter a very April, and the sun goes through purification, where the sense of self is receiving the light of the sun. Why am I not saying illuminated? Is obvious because it's not the Lumiere um, camera obscura box type of illuminated, but it is the authentic light shed into the sense of self. This is where the sun exalts in the I am. And Aries is inspiring people to sovereign up and accepting that when they sovereign up, the Aries is not afraid of confrontation, but rejoices at hearing another opinion, whether they agree or disagree. People that have encountered to actual healthy Aries, it's a very unique experience of actual freedom and authenticity. It's somebody that completely disagrees with you, but is fascinated by what you have to say. Um, Somebody that might not at all be seeing things the way you do, but would be vehemently and authentically fighting for your right to speak as well. Um, and that's what they say, that's what they mean when they say the sun exalts in Aries. When I worked with solar Aries solar talismans, then the big notion of not accepting an ultimatum. But I add to that, seeing if there is an either or in Aries, and with Neptune there is going to be the image of an either or, and there is going to be the real authentic either or, because Aries is survivalistic. Aries doesn't have an option around its sense of self, and this is where the either or is not an ultimatum, but is a self assertion, self determination, and declaration of independence towards the self. This is where we actually find what is the essential for us to shine, and that is a non negotiable. And when people try to make that negotiable, then there is inflammation, treason, what is being perceived as espionage, um, and epic intelligence fails that are not controlled as they seem to be. I can tell you, before the Epstein files, I literally heard people saying, please make it be legal, make it be legal. Oh my God, make this go legal. Knowing that the whole reasoning of extortion cult is that not being legal. Um, and knowing that the hidden mergers and acquisitions that are done better tend to becoming unextortable. If I think about what would be the best quality for a business person, Sun exalting Aries is becoming unextortable. And it's both addressing the patterns of the creation of the later extortable person and being aware where what would cause one to lose their sense of self and require that as prerequisites to any choice and basically um, courageously talk about the invalidity of the contracts and NDAs that were not based on choice and sense of self, which is one of the most, if I think about what would be the deepest shadow work for Aries, it's acknowledging the boundaries of the sense of self, the awareness of the vulnerability of the I am. In fact, this is one of the darkest roads I had to do when I was dealing, for me, particularly with the Rolodex. Um, this is also recovering from the myth of the tormented artist or the beauty in pain being elevated to fall to um, from the point of processing grief and processing joy and expressing ourselves in our grief and in our joy to basically living in some sort of a perpetual cycle. Um, and that is, it is also what Art with the Stars is about. Because when we think about re-envisioning a Renaissance, that if you think about Leonardo da Vinci being depressed or tormented, and the ideation of this state of the art, rather than asking ourselves, what would a healthy Da Vinci, what would a happy, thriving, healthy Da Vinci create, and how farther into the pages of the times would that last, we are blinded by the almost crushing mountains of what was outdated that was set in stone. Um,